A huge shout out to NIS America for sending me Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel 3 early so that way I could do a review on the game. So we're going to do a non-spoiler review. Make sure you're hitting that like button, subscribe if you guys are new, and let's get into this review of this very, very, very fun game. So I've spent the better part of 2 weeks playing the Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel series. Part 1, I think I finished that game in about 75 hours, which, man, that was a long game. And Part 2, I was able to finish it in about 40 hours, which was very, very, very well paced. That's a lot of varies. But in comparison, that's about half the time of Part 1, because Part 1, like I said, finished in 75 hours, and that was with me skipping scenes, skipping the dialogue text for a lot of the filler that was in the game and whatnot. So 75 hours is a long time to invest into a game. And then again, coupled with Trails of Cold Steel 2 at 40 hours, and now Trails of Cold Steel 3, which I've clocked in about 50 hours, and I don't even feel like I'm anywhere near the end of the game yet. So with that being said, let's get into this review. It's going to be a non-spoiler review, and I'm putting footage, if you can't tell already, from the prologue of the game because I don't want to give away anything for you guys. I want you guys to be able to experience this yourself. Yes, I am going to be putting out daily videos on Trails of Cold Steel 3, which will have spoilers in it, but it will at least be periodical. So with that being said, let's get started with the review. First things first, I do want to note that this game feels more like a requel. If you guys don't know what a requel is basically a reboot sequel. So why do I say that? Well, I say that because that's how it feels. It feels like I'm playing part 1 all over again in a way, because it's got pacing that's very similar to part 1. It's doing a lot of world building. It's doing a lot of lore aspects of the series. Versus part 2, where part 2 was more the action stuff. Because we did all the lore building in part 1, and then we got part 2. And part 2, the reason why it went so quick was because it was very well paced. In the regard that it was just there was more action and more stuff going on as opposed to dialogue and world building as far as the characters, because the characters already got established in part 1. So that's what leads me into Trails of Cold Steel 3 being feeling like a reboot sequel, because now we have a new class 7 that's led by Rean, who was the protagonist of the first 2 games and is the protagonist in this game as well. And Rean is now a teacher. Now, that's not going to spoil anything because that's all established in the prologue for part 3. And the prologue is available on PS4 to play currently. So if you guys want to play the prologue, or the demo, which is the prologue, then go ahead. It's about 2 hours long, and it's actually a lot of fun. So that's also something that they did in part 1. So there's a lot of mirror aspects in part 3 and part 1, more so than part 2 and part 3. So the pacing of everything, the prologue that they established in part 3 is very, very similar to the prologue that was in part 1. Also, the fact that you are meeting new characters for the first time and introducing old characters again, it gives that kind of world building vibe and feel about everything. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but again, it makes me feel like I'm playing part 1 all over again. The combat's been improved. So instead of a circle, which was prevalent in the previous 2 games, where you have all your actions mapped to a circle and you can go ahead and go through the circle to do your actions, whether you're going to attack, you're going to use your craft, you're going to use your magic abilities, which are your arts in this game and the previous games. So all of that is there, but it's no longer mapped to a circle. Instead, you have your actions mapped to your D-pad and your triangle, circle, square, and X, which actually makes combat feel a little bit better. But coming from the previous 2 games, it takes a little bit getting used to. So if Trails of Cold Steel 3 is your first Trails game, or is your first Cold Steel game, then you won't have that problem that I had, where I had to basically just get the circle mapping of the actions out of my head and adapt to the new mapping that they have for combat, which again is not, it's actually an improvement over it, because the actions are faster. Instead of having to scroll through the different actions that you want, it's easier to access the different actions that you want. But the other thing in regards to combat is that it feels slow. Now, I know that's kind of a contradiction, because I just said that it does allow for faster actions to be taken, but the combat itself feels slow. And again, that has a lot to do with the fact that I just came from playing Cold Steel 1 and 2 and having turbo mode in the PS4 HD remasters. So, mid-edit Goshen here, while I was in the middle of editing this video, it was brought to my attention by a fellow content creator who is also working on this game, that there is in fact a turbo mode. The turbo mode is actually mapped to the left side of the touchpad, which I didn't realize. Yay! I guess that'll make the second playthrough a lot faster, but yeah. So that whole thing I said about there's no turbo mode and that it feels like slow motion. Yeah, there's a turbo mode. So I just wanted to add this little edit in there, because, you know, correct when I'm wrong about something. So shout outs to what's his name? In the Discord that we're in, Dr. Colin. Shout out to Dr. Colin for bringing that to my attention, because, oh boy. All right, back to the game. Versus this game, which does not have a turbo mode on it. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that Cold Steel 1 and 2 HD remasters released after Cold Steel 3, because Cold Steel 3 released back in 2017. We are now getting the localization of it, so it would have been nice if a turbo mode option was in there, because everything feels like it's in slow motion. Just want to reiterate, there is a turbo mode. Not just the combat, but also the way that the characters move and the way that you go about the map and everything else like that. It all feels like it's in slow motion, only because my eyes got used to the turbo mode in the previous 2 games. Again, if you're playing this as your first Cold Steel game, you probably won't have that mindset, or you probably won't get stuck on that the way that I did. Again, it's not anything to detract from the game. It's not really a negative point to it. It's just something that I wanted to note, because that's something that I felt playing through the game. Now, the story building or the lore building has a little bit of a problem, and it's not so much a problem with the way that it was localized or anything like that. The lore building is a problem because we have, when I say we, us in the US market and most global markets, we're missing 2 games. There's 2 games that takes place in between of part 2 and 3, which kind of bridges a lot of the story, and that's the Crossbell story arc and I think they just call it the Erebonia story arc. I don't remember which one takes place before which, but both of them take place between part 2 and part 3 as kind of a tie-in between the 2 games. And the reason why that's a problem is because they reference a lot of different events that happened in those 2 games that we have not had. And because we haven't had those 2 games, a lot of times when I was reading or hearing about those prior events, it kind of left me scratching my head and just throwing it out the door, because I didn't play those 2 games. And again, it's not really the fault of the localization, on NIS America's part. It's more just that we didn't get those games yet. Maybe we will get those games. I know that there is a translation patch available if you guys have those games, but again, it's not an official localization, and because of that we're missing portions of the story. So a lot of those references are in part 3, and it just, for me, it kind of detracts from the story a little bit and understanding fully about what was going on with everything. Yes, you can understand, what is going on or what happened in the past, because they do reference it so much that you can piece it all together. But the fact that especially in the beginning of the game, when they're referencing that, it just makes it a little bit harder to follow until you progress through the game, and then it's like, okay, well, now I can piece it all together. The characters that are in the game are very enjoyable. Like, they have a lot of traits that are taken from some of the prior characters, and yes, the prior characters are in this game, but when I say the characters, I'm talking about the new characters, the new Class 7. It's a much smaller class than the original Class 7 that was in Part 1 and Part 2, which I actually like that the amount of playable characters kind of condensed a little bit as opposed to Part 1 and 2, I'm sorry. Part 2 had way too many characters for its own good, to be honest with you. At the end of the game, I felt overwhelmed with the amount of characters that was in it, where this game, I don't feel overwhelmed. It's actually quite nice having a smaller cast going through most of the game. Like I said, the other characters from the prior games do interact, and you can play as them at certain times. So they are in there, and they are a part of the story. And again, I'm not going into anything regarding that because that will give away spoilers, and I don't want to give away spoilers for this. Going back to the combat, there are combats with Soldats or Valimar the Ashen Knight, which was introduced at the end of Part 1 and was a big portion of Part 2. Now, it's also a big portion in this game as well, and the combat in that is improved as well. Just overall, the way that combat is vastly improved, and it feels really, really good. The voice acting was actually really good, very fun to listen to, the way that the voice actors were. The only issue that I have is that I wish there was more voice acting. There's a lot of times where a character will get introduced and only that character has voice acting and the other characters have no voice acting. And it's very weird to have that, because it's not like other games where you have a silent protagonist, so you are the character and you like your voice is that character. But because we have the voice acting for all the characters, it kind of takes it away when a new character comes in and only that new character has voice acting and everybody else doesn't. So to me, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more voice acting, but the voice acting that is in the game and the cast that's portraying the characters, the new characters, and the returning cast, they all do a stellar job, and it's fantastic. Overall, the game is a lot of fun to play, regardless of some of the issues that I had. And, so far within the game, I'm still playing it. Because there's a lot, this is a long game. So regardless of the issues that I had, it's not any issue that takes away from a newcomer to the series in this game if this is your first time playing this game, and it's not going to take away from the experience of the in-depth story. And something else to note that regarding the story, since I just mentioned that, in contrast with Part 1, because I know I made comparison with Part 1 that Part 3 feels a lot like Part 1. Part 1 had a lot of fluff. It had a lot of filler. Most of the game was just stuff that you really didn't need. And to be honest, if you had cut all of that out, then most of the game is pretty much the last 20 to 25 hours of Cold Steel 1. So Cold Steel 3 actually is paced a little bit better with the story, because the story, it follows from the first 2 games. It does continue on while introducing new characters, but it gives that kind of feel where like everything's important. Yes, you do have some moments where it's just filler, like the moments where you're doing field missions, where you're just running errands and tasks for random people. Like a lot of that is just filler dialogue, which I found a lot of times I could just skip it and it doesn't detract from any of the story for me. But at the same time, a lot of the main story is actually paced very well. So I actually liked that in this game as opposed to the first game. Overall, the game was a lot of fun to play, but it does feel like you do need to play the other games And I know a lot of people have mentioned this to me before, and they mentioned it to a lot of different people, that you probably should play the other games, specifically the Trails in the Sky series, but not everybody has access to those games. And yes, we did get localization for all 3 of those games, but again, we're still missing 2 of the games. So for me, most of the missing story is actually those 2 missing games as opposed to the Trails in the Sky series. But you should at least play part 1 and 2 if you can before you play part 3, only because it builds so much on the story. And there's so much in this game that I could just go on and on talking about the game itself, how everything is. Oh, by the way, I didn't even mention the graphics. The graphics is a major improvement from the first 2 games. Major improvement. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I honestly feel like by the time we get part 4, that like it'll be even better looking, specifically because maybe the PS5 will be out by then. But just the graphics are beautiful. The way that the characters designs are in this game is a major improvement from the previous 2 games. Not that they were bad before, but let's be honest, the previous 2 games were PS3, and even with the HD remaster, it's still PS3 graphics just enhanced. The graphics and the character designs and everything in that regard looks absolutely beautiful. There are a couple frame rate issues here and there. It feels like at some portions it does drop to like 30 frames per second as opposed to staying 60. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's just too many particles on the screen and it just causes that to happen. But that might be just like the PS4 hardware just not being able to keep up at that point. The music is great, and the humor, which I loved the humor in part 1 and 2. The humor's there. The humor's fantastic. There are some moments that make you feel a little awkward, and my daughter was watching me play the game, and I had to like distract her at a moment because there was a very inappropriate moment for her to watch because she's 8. But other than that, the humor was great. I loved it. I loved especially seeing the returning cast because they have that chemistry that was already established in the first 2 games, and it carries over immensely in this game. So that's a big up for it. As far as JRPGs go, this is definitely one to play, and I would recommend it to anybody because listen, when you just focus on playing a specific series for 2 weeks, you're invested. Like 2 weeks, no sleep, and just like filled with caffeine. Your brain's going a million miles a minute because you're just filled up in caffeine because all you've been doing is just playing this one series over, like start to finish for all the games. And now I'm just rambling because that's how my brain is going because I spent so much time in this game. It's a must play. Game comes out October 22nd, and I hope you guys enjoy all the videos I'm going to put out on it. You guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Hit the like button, subscribe if you guys are new. And once again, big shout out to NIS America. Thank you so much, guys. You have a great rest of your day. Good game.
She did.